Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our August Coffee and EVs for the West Virginia Electric Auto Association. We have our special guest tonight, Mr. Ron Freund, and I hope I hope I'm close with that, Ron.
Yep.
And then, so Ron, if you want to, or Marty, if you want to introduce Ron and maybe how you guys got involved with each other. I know you invited Ron to attend, and then we can turn it over to Ron.
Well, Ron and I have been acquaintances for several years now. He arranged for my wife and I and other friends to take a tour of the Tesla Fremont factory. When was maybe 2019 or so, and so we've been acquaintances and friends, and we've met up at the Fully Charged show in Austin back in about the time COVID rolled out, and we probably chat several times a month. So, Ron, take it away, man. I really appreciate you doing this for us.
No problem. No, thanks, Marty. Yeah. Just in the beginnings of my electrification, that's about 1998. That's about the time where I'm going to be stopping this presentation. We had... in the Silicon Valley, which is where I live, we had a bunch of people arguing about whether or not the EAA should be on the internet. And the consensus was, no, let's not do that. And there's four people that I was pretty close to. One of them pretty much steered me toward my very first electric vehicle. And a couple other guys, we all said, no, this cannot be. We've got to be on the internet. You guys don't realize what you're missing if you're not going to make a presence on the internet. And we basically became the gang of four, and we ran for positions on the board of the National Electric Auto Association, which had about 25 or 30 chapters at that time. Some of them were active, some weren't. And we ran as a unified slate, and then we won. And basically in early 2001 at our first meeting, just before the meeting, people said, so who wants to take the chairmanship for the first years or so? And our terms were going to be 3 years. And I raised my hand foolishly and got roped into this thing. And the other two guys very quickly dropped out. And anyways, that's how I started doing this stuff. And over these last 15, 16, 20 years, whatever, I've collected all sorts of stuff from people that are no longer with us. The founders have passed away. I met a couple of them. And anyway, I've got all these photographs. I have thousands of 3x5 photographs, some of which I've scanned here today. And let's get into this and talk a little bit about how the organization started. This is the clarion call way back in February of 1967. The Santa Clara Valley Engineering Council felt that a spark was needed to accelerate the tremendous potential of electrification in the transportation. And all sorts of play on words here. This is a paragraph that I stole right out of this document. If anybody's interested in this thing, it's pretty interesting from people that I never even heard of, organizations I've never even heard of before. They've long since gone away. They submitted papers on lightweighting, on streamlining, and certain materials that were to be used on electric vehicles. And this was in 1967. And
just walking out
it was
on Wyndham.
Sorry about that. Whatever. Anyways, sorry. If anybody wants this, I have a PDF of it. It's probably with pictures, or it's basically typewritten. It's not even nicely typeset. They're good old Smith Corona or whatever, IBM Electric typewritten pages, lots of papers, very few pictures inside, very few drawings, but that's how things began in 1967. And then more and more, the founders decided in the mid-70s to make it a nonprofit organization. And as you can see here, weight reduction, streamlining, electrification using alternate components was top of mind. Alternate components like fiberglass, etc. The Space Brace had produced some brand new batteries, but silver mercury, I believe, was one of them. But it never got mass production. They were all made out of, items that were so expensive nobody could afford them. Golf cart flooded lead acids were the rule. And I call them throughout this presentation PBA. PB is a periodic chart symbol for lead, PBA for acid, lead acid. In the mid 1990s, a guy in Michigan named Stanford Obshinsky invented the nickel metal hydride battery. And that was about a twofold increase in energy density compared to lead acid. Lead acid was the same thing it was way back in the 1870s, 1880s when Thomas Edison was messing around. He created something called a nickel iron battery, which apparently were used in railroads for signaling. And some of those things are still in service today, still producing a little bit of voltage and very low currents. And anyways, we've come a long way since then. After nickel metal hydride came along, we had early lithium cells. And the guy who invented the lithium battery, John Goodenough, just turned 100 last year, and I believe he passed away since then. But those are what we're seeing in all the cars that we're driving today. And there's only a few people that are still playing with lead. Lead is dead as far as I'm concerned. So, okay, moving rapidly along. Okay, is that going to work? Okay. Conversions were the rule. Everybody was converting their vehicles with aircraft starter motors, forklift motors, and things were really, really difficult because things were very heavy. The early American cars may have looked sleek, you know, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, but they were heavy and they were made out of really thick sheet metal. I mean, the doors were probably 14 or 16 gauge steel. And nowadays I can put my knee through them. They were made out of 20 gauge steel. It's almost like cardboard. Anyways, lots of imports happened in California in the 1960s. Oh, by the way, I live in California, so where a lot of things are happening here. The oil crisis came and kind of slapped the U.S. consumer around. And in 1979, there was more interest all of a sudden in what had started a little while before. And people were starting to say, let's start doing conversions. So actually, that's where a lot more stuff was happening, because little by little, solid state electronics was allowing us to use electronic components instead of switches and relays to add different voltages to make our cars go a little faster. As you'll see in the rest of this presentation, we had some really beefy low voltage, high current demand systems, and they just didn't go very far, didn't go very fast, and took a long time to get in there. So gliders are when you're getting a body of a car from a manufacturer, except doesn't have a drivetrain in it. So that's how a lot of them arrived. But after a while, the lawyers at the big three said, nah, you don't want to do that anymore. People are going to sue you. So going back to some basics here on this slide I'm on now, the fourth bullet point down, there are four basic components in these early EVs: electric motor, battery charger, and a motor speed controller. And the speed controller was basically switches and huge contact relays. We tried to do things with SCRs. These were called silicon controlled rectifiers. There's something was invented by General Electric in about 1973. And they were pretty useful and have been put to serious use since then. They do the conversion of the DC power line that's coming from the Columbia River up in Portland area in all the way down into Sylmar, California. There's a single DC line that's coming down across the Sierras, and they transmit DC, and the return path is through the earth, and they're using SCR choppers to convert it back to AC. And these things are huge. They are 1200 amps with huge breakdown voltages, and you walk in the room and all you can hear is 60 cycles. Anyway, so solid state devices were not of the kind that you could use one of them to handle any kind of current for any motor. Motors have a nasty tendency to create back EMF, and they have wicked startup transients. So little semiconductor devices would generally go like a fuse, and they'd blow out very quickly. So it took the 80s and even into the early 90s to perfect them, to make them so that they were usable as solid state motor speed controllers. And the last bullet point here, no BMS, battery management system, or battery monitoring system, if you're really simple, to read the pack voltage. They simply had a voltmeter and an amp meter, and they were primitive. I'll have a couple pictures a little later on here. So things are really pretty simple. Here's some of the early badges that we had in the organization. The very top here where my mouse pointer is, I don't know if you can see it or not. It's a lightning bolt through a circle. It says EAA. Well, kind of unfortunately, the EAA was also the Experimental Aircraft Association, which today is about 1,000 chapters, and they have a $10 million annual budget. They're really big. And those guys also happened to grab, in the early days of the 1990s internet boom, they grabbed the domain EAA.org. So the best we could do was EAAEV.org. So that's what we were for quite a while until we became electricauto.org. So that was our logo until 1992. They had a contest, and they came up with this thing on the right-hand side here, actually called the RAT logo. And that held out for the organization until right around the time COVID came along in 2020. I think they came up with a new logo. Maybe it was in 2021, I forget. And here's some of our chapters. This red and white logo is a Seattle Electric Vehicle Association. They're still around. They're their own 501c3. Many of our chapters also became nonprofits. And SEVA, in conjunction with, I think this is the Electric Vehicle Association of Canada. And I think now they're called the Electric Vehicle Society or something like that. This is their early logo. In 1986, they held a logo up. They held a convention, if you will, or a get-together. Lasted a couple days in Vancouver, and they had a contest where they were, racing against each other. They weren't really races, but they were with what do they call these cars? They look like soapbox derby cars. They had one 12-volt battery in them and a single motor, and you just drove them until the battery was dead. And if you drove them carefully, you could probably achieve a win with a distance record. But if you roughhoused it and really accelerated hard, you wouldn't even make it to the halfway mark. Anyway, we all know about all that kind of stuff. At the very bottom here, you can see a couple of metal plaques, and these were given to awards to distance rallies they had. They said, okay, we got a closed course of 2 miles long. Whoever can traverse that the most number of laps wins a plaque. And they typically had 20 entries. And people would come there with their conversions and spend a Sunday afternoon or something racing around the course and collect their prize if they made it to the finish line or whatever. And after a while, we started just giving them for showing up. Because the OEMs came along with their vehicles, and that stuff was frowned upon. In fact, we used to hold the rally at Stanford University, and after a while, I think it was in 2002, we had our very first parade to celebrate the advent of the EV1, which had showed up. General Motors showed up with the big travel vehicle, a big 53-foot trailer. And I think they had 6 EV1s in there for test drives. And Stanford saw us driving around the campus in an unsanctioned parade, and they said, that's it, no more, you're out of here. So we went across the street to Palo Alto High School and continued there for a couple more years. And anyways, these get-togethers were to show off what people had done. A lot of people had done these things in their garages. Let me scroll this down. Here's what our early meetings looked like. They were kind of sad, kind of dismal. There is a woman sitting right here where my pointer is in the lower left-hand corner of this picture. Let me scroll this down a little more. This was a picture of a meeting that was held on Alameda Naval Base, probably in 1978, and mostly males, white guys. And all the attendees probably had their own little projects going, trying to replicate the successes of a couple of the pioneers. This blue Chevy Vega was done by one of the founders of the organization. Bill Palmer was his name. I was real friendly with the guy, and he passed, I believe, 4 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I forget. And his son, also Bill Palmer, gave me all his collected documents. So I have a huge collection of 4 2.5 cubic foot moving boxes full of papers and magazine cutouts and stuff that probably nobody's going to want to see. I'm going to try to donate that to the UC Davis Institute for Transportation Studies and see if they'll take it. Maybe they'll just throw it in a dumpster. I don't know. But these were what our meetings were all about. We'd have a technical presentation on a chalkboard. Very simple. We didn't have any overhead foils. We had no computers to work on. And afterwards, we'd adjourn to the parking lot and look at under the hood of what people had done here. And this was one of the earliest conversions of an OEM car, the Chevy Vega. Once again, wonderful pictures of people's butts, backs of their heads. This is again the Chevy Vega, and he was powered by lead acid. Okay, moving rapidly along. Here is another commercial conversion that was done by a company called Jet Industries, based in Austin, Texas. They did a couple thousand of these things and gave them to the military. The Navy had a bunch of them up on Alameda Naval Base, like I said earlier. I believe there were some at Kelly Air Force Base in Texas. Or is Kelly Air? Yeah, I think Kelly Air Force Base is in San Antonio. I forget. Anyways, they went out of business when the company president took all the money and disappeared, kind of went offshore. So they went out of business, and they used a simple Prestolite motor, 12 or 16 6-volt batteries, as you can see here. This display in the lower left here is under the front hood. No, I'm sorry, that's under the back. That's under the back hatch. This is a Plymouth Horizon. And on the right-hand side here, these 4 batteries are under the hood. And this black box on the far side, the far right side of this lower right-hand picture, that is the battery charger, and it was a buzz box. And what's a buzz box? It is a ferro-resonant transformer that is supposedly regulated, and they put a rectifier on the outside, on the output of that, and no capacitor filtering needed, really, because the capacitors were the batteries themselves. They were just a gigantic capacitor. So they gave us a little bit of isolation from the raw line, from the AC mains, and pumped in, 180 volts into a 140 volt pack or whatever. It was just enough to get it to 2.25 or 2.55 volts per cell. That's a fully charged lead acid battery. So this is what these things look like. And by the way, these cars were all already over their gross vehicular weight rating, their GVWR, without even passengers or a driver in it because of the excessive weight. Each of these batteries weighed something like 62 pounds. And I believe these were made by Trojan. You can see 3 cells, 3 of these white dots. Those are the cells for the individual battery. And 2 of the guys, this guy up here in the pink shirt in the upper left-hand corner, the right-hand side, that's Scan Skokin. He was chairman during the mid-90s and then passed it off to a guy named, brain dead. I'll get back to him. And anyways, he worked at Hewlett-Packard, and he's one of the guys who measured William Hewlett's pocket for the HP35 electronics slide rule. And he's a very good circuit designer. He's a Czech background. And he made some of the controllers I'll talk about here in a little bit. Okay, moving rapidly along. This is under the hood of Bill Palmer's Vega. It is not pretty. You can see on the left-hand side here, these are 3 of these 6-volt traction batteries squeezed in the front here. And this is an adapter to the transmission bell housing. And there's the mounting plate. That's something that was difficult to machine because you had to kind of work off the pattern of the transmission housing and the pattern of the motor you're going to mount to it. So always a machining job that was difficult. And to do these kind of things at home, you'd need a lathe, a drill press, of course, all the standard metalworking tools. I like working in cardboard at first and then transferring everything to aluminum when I make my conversions. But they a lot of times use steel angle iron. For that, you need an oxyacetylene torch or stick weld or whatever. So building these things is not pretty, and it was a rat's nest of wires, shall I call it. Okay, moving rapidly along. Here's a cleaner mount of somebody else's batteries for them over the motor mount. This is mounted directly to a differential. You can see the half shafts coming out here on either side of the differential. And these are, again, the tall lead acid batteries. I think they're 10 or 11 inches tall. And like I said, they really weighed a lot. Can everybody see this picture fully, or should I make this wider? I think I'm encroaching on things.
It's okay. Maybe
Okay.
you could move a little faster, Ron.
Okay, sorry. Come on, picture. Okay, since there were no analog, there was only analog instrumentation, no LEDs, no LCDs, no liquid crystal, just meters and incandescent light bulbs. This is somebody's dash. I don't know who it was, but you can see this is a brake handle and a shifter from a Volkswagen. And I think this is a Volkswagen dune buggy based on the shape of the door over here, but this is wood. Somebody's a woodworker and put his meters there, and I love this display here. He apparently had 2 field winding current meters, so I believe there's 2 motors in this thing, 2 battery meters, and then there's a little sign at the bottom here. It says, electric, a better way to go, exclamation mark. And the obligatory 8-track player underneath there. Okay. Kit cars were also the big thing. This is a kit car. I think it's a Bradley. Maybe I forget. Maybe it was made by a local company. Anyways, you used a VW Bug chassis and loaded your lead acid batteries in there. And I had a friend who bought a Bradley, and he proudly drove it up and down the freeway for 2 or 3 days until about the 4th day. I guess he had a bump, and the 8 lead acid batteries, which was about 500 pounds of weight right up in the front end, was so heavy that the front end just totally collapsed, and he had to be towed away, and the tow truck had a difficulty getting the wreck up on the on his flatbed. But the nice fiberglass body, gull wing doors, and all that stuff. Here's under the front hood of that, some more batteries hidden away. This is a local company in Cupertino. I've provided a link here. You can actually see their products. Hagila, I think is what it was called. So you just put it on top. You strip down the chassis off a VW Bug, take it down the bare pan, and then plop this thing on top. So everybody used lead acid batteries, and everything that we did to improve things was all about lightweighting and streamlining. So progress really stalled because it's all about the batteries. Speaking of batteries, charging is a critical thing, and charging those batteries was pretty primitive. Some people actually took a rectifier, put it on the end of a line cord without any regulators, just a simple timer, sometimes even a kitchen timer, and they just applied that right to the batteries. And some of them used a variac to control the voltage a little bit. Very inefficient. And the worst thing was the waveform that the utility saw was highly reactive. There was a lot of capacitive or inductive component to it. Reactive power is something that the utilities can't charge you for, but it makes the wiring in your house get warm or hot. So to get around that, they created something called power factor correction. And that wasn't done until the late 1990s. And after you power factor correct, the utility sees a pure resistive load, and they can charge you full money for that. But and it's also much more safe because you aren't going to have your wires cooking up. But the lead acid batteries had a wonderful characteristic that the terminal voltage pretty much reflected their state of charge. Well, with lithium batteries, they have such a flat spot here in the middle of this curve. They go almost no change in voltage from 80% all the way down to like 10%. And then they drop off a cliff very quickly. But the lead acid batteries were very nice, so you could just use a voltmeter on your total pack and say, well, that gives me an idea of how much left I have. So conversion was very difficult to convert AC to DC and back to AC and back to DC. And every time you did it, you lost about 15% just because the rectifiers are pretty crappy. Nowadays, they have ways of totally eliminating the need for a rectifier, so you don't have that loss, and you can get really high efficiencies on the conversion from AC to DC. This Poickert curve is something that also refers to the rate at which you can extract current from a battery. Lead acid behaved very badly, especially when it got cold. You needed to overcharge them by typically 10-20% every time. In other words, just to get them to full charge. And in doing so, you'd end up having acid boiling out, and it made a mess. Now, the Poickert number is a metric that they use for rating lead acid batteries. It's an exponent. It's pretty complicated, but lithium batteries are almost perfect. They almost don't have a Poickert number, and they're very, very efficient. what they call it, the Faraday charging efficiency is very high on lithium batteries. So we're in a better place. Here's a schematic diagram of an early pulse width modulated solid state controller. This is one of the more horrific ones. Check out the battery voltage, 36 volts down here in the middle, this little box at the bottom left. There's another one. There are two batteries, battery 1 and battery 2, each with 36 volts. And if you notice here, there's 24 volts coming off. So they're tapping off 24 volts for whatever reason, I don't understand, maybe to drive some relays. But if you tap off the batteries, you're going to imbalance the, okay, obviously this is 3 12-volt batteries in series. And the one that's tapped off, he's going to get a different load on him than the other one that didn't get tapped off. And this number 2CM76, that's an aircraft starter motor. So the pieces that were put together here were really just incredible. And this is Stan Skoken's controller that he built, a solid state controller to do field weakening. So he actually had a little bit of speed control. And this thing over here, just over the motor, where my cursor is, that is a amp meter for the field winding, which is this inductor over here. And on the far left, there's another amp meter for the armature. And you had to keep an eye on it. And I don't know basically how you even drive something like this. It used to be you flipped a bunch of switches, which controlled a bunch of relays. And it's just really primitive stuff. This was mid-1984. And then when solid-state circuits got a little bit better, then they started making a solid-state controller. I forget the guy's name. He was given an assignment, basically create a pulse width modulated controller using MOSFETs, metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistors. And they were very lossy. They were very lossless. They had very small losses compared to bipolar junction transistors. And he basically made a design and gave it to Curtis. And Curtis out of Mount Kisco, New York, made that thing commercially, and they made thousands of them for golf carts. And they were truly a solid state speed controller, and they whined. You could hear them, and they were in the audible. Their switching frequency was in the audible spectrum, so you could hear them as they take off. Anyways, very primitive, and semiconductors have come a long way. This is a picture of an even earlier conversion, a picture of a Honda 600. They were made, I think, up until about 1975, and then they came up with the Honda CVCC, the stratified charge, basically a 1975 vintage car that didn't need a catalytic converter. Honda did some really good engineering. And this is a 600cc four-cylinder engine, which later became the 754 for the Honda motorcycles. Anyways, this is something I want to tip everybody off to. The EValbum.com is a website hosted by a member of the EAA. I think he still is a member, Mike Chansey. He's in Kansas City, and they have over 4,000 conversion cars and dream cars, ones that never got finished. Oh, this is what I'm going to do. Here's all the pictures of what I'm going to do. And, you know, it's really interesting. Basically, in the mid-1990s, the California Air Resources Board threw down the gauntlet and challenged the big automakers to produce commercially viable cars. And they were sued and basically capitulated. And there's a movie you can find on YouTube. It's called Who Killed the Electric Car? That's what these initials are for, WKTEC. It's on YouTube. It's in 10 pieces or 9 pieces. I think they're each 9 or 10 minutes long. And the nice thing about YouTube is you can hit the space bar and stop it. What do you say? And you can back it up using the comma key, or you could advance it with the period key. And then you start it again, and you know, you can turn on captions. You can slow it down. YouTube is quite nice because this is a very densely packed presentation. It lasts 90 minutes. And Sony Pictures allowed Chris Payne, the director, to produce this thing, and that was introduced in 2006, and that kind of told the whole story of what was going on, the politics, and etc. And then there was a follow-on movie, Revenge of the Electric Car, and it turns out Chris Payne is working on a third one right now, and we'll be looking forward to that. So anyways, let's see where we're at here. That is it. Let me ask your questions. You guys still there?
Hey, thanks, Ron. A lot of stuff I never knew about. I didn't know all the conversions went so far back. and people were really struggling without lithium batteries. Now we have one guy in the club who built an electric car, and actually two who built electric cars back in the early 2000s, and they both used lead acid batteries.
Yep.
And, they were way overweight and dangerous to drive. And I think the one of them was still driven by his son up until 3 or 4 years ago.
Cool.
So.
Well, yeah, they're slow because of the incredible weight, but they can get you from A to B if that's all you care about, you know?
Well, did you never built any, right? You never really built your own. You had the RAV4, I know. You still do.
No, actually, my very first car in 1998 was a lead sled. It was a Ford Escort Series 1, also made by the same company that made that Plymouth Horizon, Jet Electrica in Austin, Texas. I got mine from a guy who bought it from the Navy, and it was lead, and it was a 96-volt system with a buzz box charger. And I took it up to 120 volts, and by adding 8-volt batteries instead of 6-volt batteries, they're about the same size, just as heavy. And I drove that for 21,000 miles, and it was a pig. But my daughter liked it because she could see out the back seat. The other car that I would take her to school in, she couldn't see out of the car, and she, you know, when are we going to be there, Dad? You know, it was, you know, a short, 5 miles away from the house. But when she got in the back of the electric car, I like this car because she could see out. But then in 2001, when Toyota came out and said, we're going to sell to private individuals the RAV4, I said, really? Cool, I'll buy one. And I did, and modified it, and didn't have to turn it in, as it wasn't a lease car. And I still have it now. It's in my garage right now. It's got its second set of batteries in it. Another friend of mine had one. There was about 300 of them sold into private hands. And a friend of mine, he blew out his inverter. And I tried to fix it for him, and he didn't want to throw any more money at it. So I said, well, what are you going to do with the car? He says, I'm going to junk it. So I asked him if I could have it. And, basically I put his battery pack in where mine was. I abused my battery pack something fierce. When I first had it, the second night I had it, I drove around my neighborhood, up and down a couple of hills here, just to find out where the ultimate limit was, how far I could go. And I think I put 135 miles, 135.4 or something like that on it. And then the little turtle barked at me and said, you need to be in reduced performance mode now. Go charge the car. And luckily I was uphill and I could roll home and into my driveway. But I abused the car in that I often drove to 0% state of charge and 10 or 12 miles beyond that. But I knew exactly where I was and how far I had to go to find a charger. But in the long run, that kicked my butt. At 126,000 miles, those batteries were toast. So the batteries I have in that very car, the RAV4 2002, now have 153,500 on them. And they're still in really good shape because I took them out of a car that I knew real well, and I had examined it way in advance. I knew who had it. And I expect that car to last me probably another 5 or 6 years, in which case it'll be 27 years old. And Toyota is in total denial that they ever made a plug-in car. And the one they made last year, the BZ4X, the wheels fell off.
I've seen that. It's a piece of junk. They've got one down at a local Toyota dealer over in Huntington. Advantage Toyota has one. It's a piece of junk.
I was kidding the guy.
Piece of junk.
Ron, I have a question. Is my microphone now working?
It is.
Yeah, very good.
Wonderful. Back in those days, did you have people that were enthusiastic about what you were doing and others were doing? Now there's lots of enthusiasts, but what was the reaction of people back in those days? California is probably the best place to start doing these things.
Yep. The reaction was a lot of times was curiosity. I was quickly condemned as a nerd, but I admit that, no problem. And the classic three questions that came out if you ever do a cars and coffee at a local get together at a church or whatever: how far, how fast, how much. And you guys are all familiar with that. Rap's not, he's nodding because he's been there, done that. And yeah, and it wasn't a lot to write home about. I kept it clean. That was the biggest chore. And I had to constantly wipe up the acid that was boiling out because I had to charge the batteries. And when I first started wiping up the acid, I didn't realize it. I'd go out there on a Saturday morning with a bottle of 409 and some Kleenexes and start wiping up the spills and stuff. And all of a sudden my wife said, "What are you doing? Your pajamas have all these holes in them right around the waist level," because the acid was just eating them up. And then I realized that, oh, you better wear some junk clothes if you're going out there to make a mess. But yeah, a lot of people were curious and they asked me if I had done it myself. And I told them, no, I bought a finished conversion. I modified it. I got rid of the buzz box and put in a solid state charger and tried to come up with a scheme for instrumenting the individual batteries so I could see which one of them was low. And that didn't work very well. And again, there was a fair amount of limitation, was time. I just didn't have enough time. I had a full-time job and we were raising our kids and stuff. And time is always a gotcha, you know. But yeah, people were generally curious, but I don't know. It wasn't until I got an OEM car where they could say, "Oh, I could see that. Yeah, I could see that in my parking lot." And but they had rebates. George W. Bush, that wonderful president, gave me a $4,000 rebate, and I believe the state of California gave me in three successive years, $3,000 rebates. So I total of $13,000 off the $42,500 price of the Toyota RAV4. Brought it down about what a gasoline-powered RAV4 would cost. And I took it on long trips. I took it from my house here in San Jose area all the way down to Santa Barbara. It took me 22 hours to get there, including charging time. But because my charger would only charge at 18 miles an hour, and that was really difficult. You know, arriving at wee hours of the night, and then it was an ordeal.
Wasn't there some guy that drove an EV1 across the country?
Oh yeah, there's a couple of them.
Yeah,
one of them was Chris Trexler. I think you can actually Google and find his story. And EV1 pages are still online. They're not online. They're available. They're archived. So Chris Trexler is one of them. I believe Greg Hansen is another. He's the guy who actually made the first plug-in Prius in about 2005. And boy, we've come a long way since then. And the Electric Auto Association, I'm happy to say, hosted J.B. Straubel in August of 2006. J.B. Straubel was, of course, the CTO of Tesla. And he talked about how he was using off-the-shelf laptop batteries. Why? Because they're made at 10 million a day. They're a commodity. And he said, we're just going to use 6,000 of these things and put them in a car. And the first Roadster had 6,831, as I recall, in 11 different sheets of something like 440 cells each. And that thing could go blisteringly fast, 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds, 244-mile range. It was a wonderful car. And then came, based on that same kind of design, they refined it some more. They came up with a Model S in 2012. And as I write in my notes, the rest is history.
Yep.
So Ron, other than the RAV4, do you have any other vehicles, electric or otherwise, that you drive regularly?
I don't have any gas-powered vehicles anymore. I gave that up when I got the Model S in 2012. Okay. I got serial number 2700 or so. Just before Christmas of 2012, I got the delivery of the Model S. My wife drives a 2018 Model 3, and I have my 2002 RAV4, now 21 and a half years old. And I have another dead 2002 sitting out in front of the house. The batteries are shot on that. We revived it, and then I got sick and I couldn't move it off the ground, so I have to tow it to a place where I can work on it again. But This was a Google employee's car, and he basically gave it to us. I mean, he says, I don't want this anymore. I'm going through a divorce. Here, take it off my hands. And that was the first time I had ever revived a completely dead nickel metal hydride pack. We put a high voltage supply on it, and over the course of 4 days, got 21 of the 24 batteries to come back alive. And then I finally did the defibrillator trick, clear, put down a couple electrodes from a power supply and gave it a 30-second jolt at a high current. Just the bad modules of the 24. And one by one, they all came back. And I was able to drive the thing home 25 miles from where we were working up in Redwood City. And then, of course, it died because I neglected it for a couple of months while I was sick. And, well, it's for sale if you're interested.
Now, one other question. You mentioned you were raising family. So has it gone to the next generation? Do your kids drive EVs?
Yep, my son does. And my daughter has, because she was living in an apartment when she got her most recent car, she got a hybrid that gets 60 miles a gallon. It was the Hyundai Ioniq that gets 59 miles a gallon. And she's been able to make it, get 59 miles a gallon. She doesn't drive very far in this society. In the economy today, you work from home, so she rarely uses the car. Maybe to go grocery shopping, if she has a bunch of groceries she has to bring home, she'll take the car. But yeah. Electric is in her future. I told her I'm going to write her out of my will if she doesn't get electric.
Well, both my kids have, and I hate to say I should say proudly Toyota hybrids. I wish they would go electric, but the kids will definitely go electric, and I'm quite sure most likely Teslas. And well, there's more things coming along, but they sure. When we're all together, they fight over who gets to drive our Model 3.
No, that's often the way it is. I mean, you get an electric car, the gas car just ends up being abandoned. And congratulations, Rep, for getting rid of your gas car. I think.
All right. Well, any other questions for Ron? We got a few other things we want to cover before we wrap up.
Just thank you, Ron. This was fascinating.
Yeah,
my pleasure. No problem.
All right. Well, just a couple of things. We're about 9 to 8 to wrap up here. So there is a note from John Christensen for those with solar at home. If you would like to support having a dedicated solar license plate design in West Virginia, they are, John and Mountain View Solar are trying to drum up enough support to do that. And I know there's a minimum number of people who have to kind of commit to taking a solar plate to do it. But just wanted to put that out there. In the email that I send for the follow-up for this meeting, I'll include a little bit more information, and you can contact John and if you are interested in doing that. Also wanted to note, for those of you who are on the Solar United Neighbors website or email list, there is a challenge, I guess, to the West Virginia net metering law again. And so they are trying to drum up support for that as well. So I want to make sure everyone's aware. And I'll forward the link to that if you want to opine to the Public Service Commission about that. So those are a couple of solar related things. Go ahead.
I'm interested in that net metering challenge. Please forward that to me too. I want to read about it.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would say on the net metering, have every member of your family send in individual comments so they'll count more and so forth with the PSC.
Yep.
I just put solar panels on 2 months ago, and I've already produced about 5.5 megawatt hours so far.
Wow.
My last bill I just got, I am right at 14 megawatt hours of credit. So nice. I overproduce more than I use, so I'm almost at 14 megawatt hours of credit.
Wow.
Need to get another EV.
I need to use it somehow.
I have about 3.1 megawatt hours credit.
There we go. There's another one.
Well, I haven't been producing but 2 months. I've
Yeah,
got
well, you'll get there, Scott. You'll get there.
1 megawatt credit, but the winter is going to take me down because
Yeah.
I don't have enough to power the whole house. But I'm working on the efficiency side of the equation in the house.
Yeah, that's
So,
another
keep
important
going.
aspect. All right, so that's I'll send out more information about those two things in the email follow-up, and Ron, I'll copy you on that as well.
Thank you.
And
Go
everybody knows about the dinner at Angela's for Kelly Bragg. She's our state energy clean cities rep, and she's just been a godsend to us for the last 7-8 years, and she's retiring. So we're taking her out to dinner.
Yep, and that was next thing on my list, Marty. So yeah, September 17th. If you haven't RSVP'd for that, let me know if you're going to make it, so we can get an accurate head count and try to get let the restaurant know for a reservation about how many folks will be showing up. And the last thing I have is just National Drive Electric Week. Of course, that is coming up here at the end of September. And I know I've got the Martinsburg event scheduled, so we'll be doing that on September 30th on Saturday up here. So if anyone's going to be up this way, feel free to stop by. Otherwise, Marty, I don't know, is there any update on with Joe Holland? I know you've had some other things going on too. So
Yeah, I've been pretty sick, and I haven't been able. I had a cold for 3 weeks. And
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't get anything. I didn't get anything accomplished there.
all right, so at least I know we'll have the Martinsburg event. That's the only one that I know that's scheduled in the state currently. But I know we've got other events especially if you live near Ohio. I'm sure RAP. I know that you guys will have something going on, and I'm sure there are others in the surrounding states if you can make it out that way.
We have 3 events going on, but what's more important for us is on October 14th, we have an event called EV Under the Stars, where we're going to bring electric cars and conservatories where we're going to actually look at the sun, and at night look at the stars. And
All right, awesome.
we think that's going to be really cool, so we'll send that information to you.
And Rap, I did get that from you. I know I did see it, and what I'm going to do is I'll forward that information out again with this follow-up email from this meeting saying we talked about it, and I'll have the information for folks who might want to let you know if they can make it or not.
Well, we'd like to invite you down. It's going to be an exciting event, and a couple months ago we went down up to Tennessee to their event, and that was fun. So it's always nice to have brothers who believe in EVs to join each other and cross state lines.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have a super blue moon coming up this week, and we'll have another one till the 2030s.
All right. Well, we're about 3-4 minutes till. Anything else before we adjourn this evening?
No, Ron, I really want to say thank you very much for
Yeah.
putting that together.
Yeah.
No
That's
problem. It's
Really
fun.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
And that's the great thing about virtual meetings is like you can be across the country in California and still join a meeting in West Virginia.
Yep.
Ron, it's always good to see you, brother.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. You gonna be available on the phone, Rep?
Absolutely. Give me a call.
I'll give you a call.
All right, brother.
All right. Thanks everyone
Thanks,
for
Robert.
joining, and we'll see you next month. Let me check my date here. So for September, I think we are looking at it'll be the 26th. So September 26th at 7 p.m. Will be our next Coffee and EVs, and so we will see everyone then.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks.
Get well, Marty.